creation is miraculous. God brings us new miracles every day. And yet, by putting the words in the spider web, Charlotte is able to manipulate the humans into doing things completely differently than they would have done them otherwise because she puts words there. And that's what's also miraculous. Words are miraculous. I always love to think about in the way in which creation works. Creation was spoken into existence. God spoke and things happened. That's how miracles happen.
Welcome to part 2 as we continue our jaunt through Charlotte's Web by E.B. White. Once again, Elizabeth Hardy joins me, and we were just chatting about what happens as the scene turns in chapter 7. There's bad news, Elizabeth.
There is bad news. And part of that cycle about the farm life and then farm life and nature in general is both beautiful and sad because it's all about birth and death. And that's this really kind of the cycle of life that we see happening there. And the old sheep who claims to not want to be the bearer of bad news, but really seems to enjoy spreading bad news, is and it's interesting to me. And we may want to talk about this some more later. There are lambs in that barn at the beginning, and there are new lambs later on. I mean, I know what happens to lambs too on farms. Thankfully, nobody in my family ever did that. There's a sheep farm up the road from us, and they're lovely people, and I think they're delightful people. But I'm like, I just don't even want to think about what happens to those little lambs because I know
Oh.
exactly. And lambs aren't sweet. I know people will tell you that. Lambs are nasty. There's nothing that smells like. Having once been, and I'll throw you a great Appalachian word here. I've been wallered by a lamb. I mean, they just get all over you, Ugh, ugh. And those clothes, they don't get clean.
You're stuck.
You're
You're
stuck.
stuck.
Ugh. Yeah, yeah, you're gonna smell like lamblin, for a long, long time. But the old sheep is, interestingly enough, who's clearly, she's seen those lambs come and go every year, and she's seen pigs come and go. She knows this is how the cycle works. And so she breaks it to Wilbur that his function on the farm is to end up in the smokehouse, in the winter. And that's part of life.
Hmm.
Certainly, in rural America at one time, I mean, people kept pigs even, if they kind of lived in town. You can keep a pig. Pigs, as we see with Wilbur, and those glorious lists. E.B. White is the master of lists, which we may want to revisit as well. He just lists and lists the things that are in Wilbur's trough. But Wilbur eats everything. He eats stuff that nobody, because pigs, I've always said that pigs are like God's wonderful recyclers. You can feed them any trash and you get bacon. So wow, oh wow, what a change. But of course, Wilbur does not wish to be turned into bacon, as we can imagine. And the revelation that that his purpose there on the farm is as a food source, is devastating to him. And as we've already seen, Wilbur is sensitive. He gets his feelings hurt. He gets upset, and he's horrified that this terrible, terrible thing may come to pass. But as we'll see, Charlotte, who is in so many ways clever, after all, the spider is often seen as the sort of the mastermind and the creator of things. She's an
Uh-huh.
engineer. We see that she is going to keep the bad news from coming true.
Now, is there something in the preceding chapters that reveals this relationship, why it is that Charlotte has taken so kindly to Wilbur or vice versa? Was it just she's altruistic in this regard, or was there some particular event or interaction that cemented this bosom buddyship for them?
It's interesting. Later on, Wilbur asks that question. He says, "Why? Why did you choose me?" And she is moved by the fact that he is her friend, because, as she says, for a spider, that's no small thing. Uh, Spiders are necessarily solitary. We never see a male spider, although we know that one had to have been involved in Charlotte's life at some point, because of course she lays eggs later. Spiders are solitary because they are predatory, so
Mhm.
they are. Spiders don't have friends. They're not like my bees in the beehive who are cruel, but also are a community. As I often tell people, the bees are not the individual animals. The creature is the hive. The bees are the cells of one creature, like they function as all one thing. But spiders are very independent, and so the idea that she watches Wilbur and he is so desperate for friendship, but that he is open minded to listen to her. He becomes he wants to imitate her. He tries to spin a web, which is really kind of funny. A pig trying to do that. But she is intrigued by him and charmed by him in that way. And of course, he is admiring of her as well. So we see these two creatures, although they are so very different, that they are both these open-minded characters who are interested in friendship and interested in others in the well-being of others. And so Charlotte's idea that she can use her skills not just to drain the blood from bugs because that's what she does, but that that somehow her rather bloodthirsty existence can have this altruistic purpose, that she can do some good in this world. I think that's driving her as well. It's certainly Wilbur individually as a person, as an individual, but also the idea that he gives her purpose and he gives her a way to have a legacy that spiders generally couldn't have.
That's very true. Well, I really like the way that the spider is the central character, and in part because of the typical reaction by most people to spiders,
Mhm.
right? I not to speak of my own work, but in the book series that I'm currently co-authoring, we have ancient talking spiders as a big part of the alternate realm, and it was on purpose. I wasn't necessarily copying Charlotte's Web, it might have been in my subconscious, but the idea of taking the characters, the creatures that are most frightening
Mhm.
and revealing something good in and through them, I think is very compelling.
Yes. And
So
that's one of the things that's so beautiful about the story in general is that we see things that we might think of as ugly, things that we might think of as, a pig and a spider. Yuck. And yet we see this beautiful friendship grow up between them, and that everything does have a purpose, which as Charlotte has to convince Wilbur early on, because at first he is sort of horrified by oh, this is awful. And then she reminds him, do you know the earth would be overrun with insects if it were not for spiders? And they are wonderful. I'm not afraid of I don't mind. I mean, I don't want crawling on my face when I'm asleep or something like that. That's a little distressing. But I every year, and my husband always teases me when I have to go clean some spider webs off, and he says, "Yes, they were just trying to help you decorate for the fall. They were just trying to be helpful. But I don't kill them. I relocate them someplace it's a little better. I think there's a whole yard out there. Any place you can put this spider web, open the place where I have to walk through it every day. Uh,
right.
but but they do sort of scare people, and so White is doing some lovely things here with helping us maybe refocus and look at everything in all of creation as being beautiful in its own way, and as we'll see in Wilbur's case, absolutely life-saving.
Yes. So Charlotte promises after the old sheep, which kind of reminds me of some of the I don't know, I wanna say this kindly, but some of the, more busybodies in church growing up that would
Mm,
want to tell everyone about everyone else's, quote, "prayer
prayer
request"
request, yes.
as a way of gossiping.
Mhm.
Anyway,
I don't mean to say bad things about people, but he drinks. Oh, yeah. Mhm.
yeah, so that's the sheep, and what do you make of Charlotte's promise to save Wilbur? That's a big, commitment to make.
It is a big promise, and yet at the same time, when you think about spiders, and they really are miraculous. I love later on when there's this conversation about that the spider's web itself, even if it doesn't have words in it, is miraculous. I mean, this is God's glory. Look at these creatures. Look what they do. It's
Mhm.
and it is, it's mesmerizing to watch what they do. Human beings making fabric is nothing compared to what a spider can do. Naturally with its own body. It's just incredible. And so that has to have given her a little bit of confidence, that she is somebody who is very much in charge of her own fate. She's like, I've decided I'm going to come to this barn and I can do things. So she does have this sort of take charge attitude. And it's interesting that her decision, her plan that she comes to, though, is not based so much on her own skill, although she certainly has skill. It's based on her observation, that
Mm.
she has observed human beings and knows that they are gullible, just as she has observed Wilbur and knows that he is worthwhile and that he is a gentle, sweet spirit that she wants to save. So her observation of humans and her idea that she knows that she can manipulate the humans into letting Wilbur live, and that's how her plan evolves.
That's beautiful.
Mhm.
And I think shortly thereafter, there's a scene in which Fern is telling her mother about these animals speaking. I would love for you just to paint that scene for us and the interaction between mother and daughter and what White expresses in that whole dynamic.
It's interesting. Fern's mother all the characters in this story are so interesting. She's the character who often frustrates me the most. I often want to say, just let Fern talk to the animals because soon enough she won't hear them anymore, and that's going to be gone. And so, as a parent, those phases when children would say, "Oh, look, do you see the fairies?" Yes. You can look at the fairies. That's fine. Eventually, you won't be looking for them anymore. Eventually, you won't be seeing that. We unfortunately, as human beings, we lose our ability to grasp the numinous, our ability to see the beautiful. And we lose that. And Fern's mother, in worrying about Fern, is worrying about the wrong thing, because it's actually quite precious that Fern is still that she hears, and she has this wonderful imagination. But like so many people, and E.B. White as a writer, I'm sure is aware there are many people who apparently their imaginations were surgically removed at some point in their lives. And poor Mrs. Arable, I love when she's talking about that she can crochet and knit. And I'm thinking, and I bet she always has a pattern, and she has never ever done anything wonky or creative with that. Um, my granny was a intense crocheter. We all still have lots of wonderful afghans she made, but these color combinations are so out there because she would just put anything together, and they're just great. Mrs. Arable would never do that. It's exactly the color it was supposed to be, and so that lack of imagination on her part leads to worry because she doesn't realize that that Fern has this beautiful way of looking at the world, and this way of seeing things that is so lovely, because that's just who Fern is. And unfortunately, children do grow up. They do lose those abilities that we sometimes have to see. And that's why it's so, being childlike. That's how we faith is by putting aside all that need to be grown up and be serious all the time and to be able to see and have wonder. And so Fern is still has that sense of wonder, even if she were just making up the conversations. This is great. I mean, as a different kind of parent, I'd be like, hang on a second, hey, let's write this down. I think we got a winner. Tell me more about the story. I'm like, who do I know who publishes kids' books written by an 8-year-old? Because so Fern, even if she were merely imagining it, and we know that she's not, this shows this lovely way that she's looking at the world in much the way that E.B. White is, and seeing the wonderful and the beautiful there.
Mm. There's something to that too with the posture of the mother in terms of creating limits that are unnecessary
Exactly. Yeah.
for a person, a child, but just generally as you remarked on people's imaginations being gone or
Mhm.
absent, that it seems so arrogant
Yeah.
because how much can one person genuinely know about the way anything works?
Yeah.
Um, Regardless of what access to information we have, there is abundant mystery every day in every function that we experience.
Isn't that wonderful to get up every morning thinking, there are so many things I don't know. I wonder what exciting new thing I'm going to learn today. It might not be a great thing. Sometimes we learn things that we didn't want to learn, but the idea that there is so much more out there. I often say that um, we have a fantastic observatory with the college, and love going up there because the more we see the heavens, the more amazing God's creation. It's like the bigger the universe gets, the more amazed I am. And so that sense of wonder, that sense that there is so much we don't know, and why don't we just enjoy it and learn what we can?
Yeah, yeah. And Wilbur learns about limitations shortly thereafter. Can you tell us a little bit about his attempt to spin a web?
Yes, poor Wilbur, and he's trying to imitate Charlotte, of course, whom he admires, and that's nice to see because she has taken over this sort of maternal role. Fern literally dressed him up like a baby and put him in the baby carriage, and had him, going around, and White even describes him as being her baby, in the carriage. So he's had this kind of sense there that he has had a foster mother in the form of Fern, and so now he's seeing Charlotte kind of the same way, so he wants to emulate her. But it's interesting that she doesn't do what Mrs. Arable does. She doesn't start off by going, "That is absolutely ridiculous. You are a pig. Stop that."
Right.
Instead, okay, I'm going to let you figure it out for yourself. And that's, of course, as we see, sort of sometimes natural consequence parenting is not always a good idea, but sometimes it's good. If you have children who say, "I'm going to go build I'm building a time machine." Great. You want some parts? Have fun. And then, as long as they're not setting the house on fire, they will figure out for themselves, maybe that was not going to work that way. And so that's what Charlotte does. She lets Wilbur try to spin a web, and even annoys Templeton to get the string to tie to his leg and everything. But then in the process, he learns. And that's one of the many things that makes Charlotte really is a good teacher. She explains the difficult vocabulary that she uses. She helps broaden Wilbur's mind and his understanding, but she also allows him to have this experiential education and to learn for himself who he
Mm.
is and what his gifts are, and that they're not.
Hmm. Do you think that White was there is there any indication from any communication of his that Charlotte was patterned after someone he knew?
Charlotte is probably patterned after many people. I've always want to be careful of the good old C.S. Lewis personal heresy. I think all writers, and that great description of the manure pile reminds us of that. And you were talking about where your ideas come from. All writers have a compost heap. J.K. Rowling specifically calls it that, but that is what all writers have. It's everything you read, everyone you know. It all kind of goes in there. And I've heard, and I don't know if this is scientific or not, I've heard that when we dream, even, that our subconscious can't invent new faces. So that everybody we see in a dream is a face we've seen somewhere, even if it was
Hmm.
just in a movie or somebody passing on the street. So in a dream. So our subconscious even is taking everything in. So even if he didn't consciously do that, his own upbringing is quite charming. His family is charming and lovely, and I'm sure he had this large family, and so reading about that family and what his childhood experiences are like, I imagine there were probably a couple of young Elwyn's experiences. That's what he went by when he was a child. He went by other things other times in his life, but that he was probably allowed to have some of those experiences of, all right, you try that and see how that turns out. So
Hmm.
that sometimes that can be good parenting.
That
And he had
that
three.
makes sense. Yeah, yeah. All right, so Wilbur fails to spin a web. Shocking, I know. Um, there is an explosion that happens next. What happens in this scene, and what does it have to do with Templeton and Wilbur?
And again, White is helping us realize that nothing is wasted. That there's purpose in everything, even the things that, even when we don't get what we want, that it's still part of a larger picture. And there is a goose egg that doesn't hatch. The goose has been sitting on her eggs, and they have a dud. They have one that doesn't hatch, and so it's not good. And so she gives it to Templeton, so he rolls it away to his little hidey hole because that's what rats do. Um, And lots of animals do this, raccoons and crows and magpies, but rats tend to particularly keep nasty things. Although it's interesting, sometimes in archaeology, or people like historic sites when they go to work on old homes, and so in fact, George Washington back here at Mount Vernon, they did some restoration several years ago, and they had to pull some, and they found all kinds of neat things in a rat's nest. They
Huh.
found textile samples. They found pieces of things, all different kinds of that the rat had dragged off. So even then, the rat actually helped with history in the future. But Templeton carries this nasty egg, and it's summertime, and it's an egg. Yuck! It's a So and those of us who know how storytelling works and things are thinking that egg's going to explode at some point. It's like that I can see where this is going, and of course this explodes because Avery, who's a really neat character. I'm going to talk about Avery's arc later on, because he just starts out as like, oh boy, dirty and loud, and he thinks he's going to catch Charlotte. Doesn't want to hurt her. He wants to catch her, because he always has a frog in his pocket, and something, a live snake, all the time. He is that boy. So he will probably, always often wonder like what becomes of literary characters later on. I'm quite sure that Avery became the either the fish and wildlife agent in the county or something, because I know kids like that, and that's exactly who they became. But he wants that spider, he wants her, and so he tries to catch Charlotte, and in the process falls on the trough and hits the egg, and the smell. Uh, and that's and why just the sensory details are so wonderful. Even if you've never been around an egg that did that, and we actually in my family had a cousin who had this pigeon egg, which she found when she was a kid, and she lived on a farm, and she didn't want to get rid of the pigeon egg, and she hid it in a cabinet. Yeah, and it did, and it exploded on its own. It didn't need any help. It was awful. Blech. And so, yes, even if you've never smelled that very distinctive smell, you can imagine what that's going to be like. But even the explosion in itself serves a purpose because it keeps Charlotte safe,
Hmm.
Charlotte protected, and Templeton, who had absolutely no intention of losing his precious rotten egg, later chalks this up as he talks. He's totaling up all of his contributions, and this is one of his contributions. I'm the one that had that rotten egg, and that saved Charlotte from getting kidnapped. Um, so it's totally not what he had planned, but he is never going to miss an opportunity for self promotion ever. Not Templeton. And but that smell, look, it's horrible, but it's also, again, part of this whole, like, wonderful sensory, smorgasbord, that we have going on in this story, and it serves this purpose, which is really nice. And, of course, it eventually does go away because, as we see, it's just part of the cycle of life. Even bad smells go away
Yes, eventually, but
eventually.
maybe the clothes have to be burned. So, now we are at the moment. We have Fern has rescued Wilbur, and the friendships have developed, and the characters have been revealed, and Charlotte has just been rescued thanks to a rotten egg, and we have the miracle
God,
of some pig.
some
Tell
pig.
me anything and everything you want to us about that scene, as well as, if you don't mind, take us back to young Elizabeth when you're reading that and what that does for your spirit.
Well, it's really lovely because if we look at where this is, and this is not my actual copy of Charlotte's Web because young Elizabeth read hers to death. It was in pieces in a box someplace, and I had this weird childhood habit, and I still sometimes. I love lemons, and so it's covered in lemon juice, and it's in like 900 pieces. It's in a box. So this is a borrowed copy that is pristine, but the miracle happens right here in the middle, right in the middle, because
That's
it's
impressive.
it's the central event, and he knew exactly what he was doing. White is a consummate. I mean, he understands it. This is the man that brought you Strunk and White. Um,
Right.
yeah, so he knows how structure works. So he puts it right there. But it is this miracle. And what's so lovely is that, like I said, spider webs are miraculous. When you look at that, you think creation is miraculous. God brings us new miracles every day. And yet, by putting the words in the spider web, Charlotte is able to manipulate the humans into doing things completely differently than they would have done them otherwise because she puts words there. And that's what's also miraculous. Words are miraculous. When we use words, when we look at, and I always love to think about in the way in which creation works, um, creation was spoken into existence. God spoke and things happened. That's how miracles happen. They are word based, they are language based. And so here is Charlotte's miracle. It's a word miracle. It's a miracle not just based on the fact that she did something really neat. She could have just made something really pretty. You know, she could have made something like really neat design, but it's words. It's actual words. And so the idea that we have words, that we can communicate with words, that is in itself so beautiful. And it's really probably the thing, one of the many things that influenced me reading this book. That same year that I read Charlotte's Web, they had a thing at school where they wanted us to say what we wanted to be when we grew up. I drew a picture. I drew the back of my head. I was sitting at a table. It didn't look like this. There was a window and there was a fan and there were papers all over the place. I wanted to be a writer. And so, because I knew right then and there that the most powerful person in any room is the storyteller.
Hmm.
Because when you have the words, you tell the story. And so that's who it's all about. As they say in Hamilton, it's all about who lives, who dies, who tells your story. Right? And so if you're telling the story, you have this tremendous responsibility, as Charlotte realizes, but you also have this tremendous opportunity. And
Hmm.
so Charlotte takes advantage of that in order to save Wilbur. And it's interesting words because they're like any other tool. We can use them to wound, or we can use them to heal, or we can use them to perform a miracle, which is what she does. And it's miraculous that a farmer gives up bacon and instead decides to let a pig live a long and happy life in his barn year after year.
We haven't got to that part quite
Okay.
yet, but what is the reaction of the folks who see this? What is the setting of it? Are we in the barn? Are we at a fairground? What's going on?
Get there. Well, the first message is right there, right over Wilbur. And Charlotte has planned this very well. She uses other words, as we'll see, but she starts off because she knows her target that she is manipulating. And all writers do. All writers need to think about their audience. Who is reading this? And how will these people respond to what I'm telling them? So she knows she can't just say, hey, in the web. She has to point out that it's all about Wilbur. So she does what any good author does. She doesn't draw attention to herself. The author becomes invisible and the subject becomes center. And so just like E.B. White becomes invisible and Charlotte and Wilbur become what we focus upon, she takes the focus off herself and focuses it on Wilbur by saying he is some pig, that he is something else. And so that idea that she immediately directs their attention to him and gets him to stand underneath it. And then she gets the added bonus of it being early in the morning when all spider webs look magical and ethereal when they have dew on them, at least until you walk through them. So if you're an early morning walker, my husband, his job, and we go on an early morning walk, but this is this beautiful image. And so when Lurvy, the hired man, and then the Zuckermans behold this miracle, they immediately think that and it's funny, a couple of folks, Mrs. Zuckerman in particular says, I think there's something strange about the spider, but really everybody sort of quickly glosses over that and thinks, that, well, we know spiders can't write, so there must be something amazing about our pig. So her trick works beautifully. She has used words powerfully to create the reality that she wants and to help others see that Wilbur is not just a source of protein, but in fact, he is a person and he is something else.
He is some
Mhm.
pig. And the other animals participate in Charlotte's endeavor
Right.
to rescue Wilbur. Could you speak to that a bit?
It's really funny, the other animals, how they work, and because they are nameless, they're just sort of, flock and herd animals. And Templeton only participates when he is bribed. I love this great, whole scheme of if Wilbur is killed, you're going to starve because you won't be able to eat out of his trough anymore. But Templeton's God is his belly. I mean, he really is. He is completely hedonistic, totally 100% focused. Templeton is in it for Templeton, but he does help by helping to come up with words for Charlotte. And she's so fascinating to me as a character. I think, where did she learn all this? She has this wonderful vocabulary sort of built in, but she needs more words. And to me, that often reminds us too that as writers, we're always still looking for words. Just because we already have some good words doesn't mean that we should stop learning or stop growing or stop seeking out more information. But so she gets a research assistant in the person of Templeton to go out and get words. And the geese try to help spell things, but they repeat everything, which is how many R's are in this word? Just because they say blah, 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 this kind of strange affectation that the geese, their idiosyncrasy that they have. So they're always doing that. So the other animals kind of contributing here because even the sheep, who seems quite cruel, the idea that they realize that here is an opportunity for them to influence their world, which normally as farm animals, they don't get to have much say in things. They don't control what goes in the trough. They don't control what happens to them. So, but here's a chance for them to have a little power. And so there's that factor as well.
Hmm. I'm curious about Wilbur starts to feel a little bit special
Yeah.
and maybe even get a little boastful.
Yeah.
What does that reveal about his nature, and also what can we take away from it as our own individuals in this world?
And even though this isn't, I often say this isn't a children's book necessarily. It is a book that children will enjoy. It is a book that has children in it. It's a book that's appropriate for children. But it's not a book that's exclusively for children. Or as C.S. Lewis would say, any book that can only be read by children is a bad children's story. But
Right.
it has that power that we all have to have those moments when we realize that we probably many of the wonderful things happen in our lives that we did not make those things happen. We have to be reminded of our own smallness in the universe sometimes. But it's interesting that Wilbur does. He is sort of foreshadowing what we see later. He is humbled and realizes that he was wrong, and he admits his wrong, and so he's able to kind of move forward from that. But he is very much like a child, and we really see his sort of progression throughout the story. And so in this way, he's got kind of that teenagery, like, I got it all together, that whole business, they always say, teenagers, quick, tell us everything right now because you clearly think you know it all. So
Right, right.
so he's got a little bit of that adolescent know-it-all stuff going on, but that's all right. He's going to move beyond that.
um, Now, Dr. Dorian, tell us about Dr. Dorian, and at this point in the story, what is Dr. Dorian up to?
Dr. Dorian is kind of funny. For one thing, I think he has really strange office hours. He's in the office at a really strange time. So he's apparently the family doctor, but he seemed to be sort of an amateur psychiatrist too, which is really quite charming. And in a small town in the 1950s, your family doctor is all those things.
Right.
There is no compartmentalization of medical care in the 1950s in a small town. And I'm thinking, even when I was a kid and we had just stopped letting people smoke in hospitals, so it was a different sort of world. But the doctor did not come in still smoking. Mine did smoke. He smoked a pipe, but it was a different kind of world. But Dr. Dorian is this interesting sort of figure. Clearly, Mrs. Arable trusts him and depends on him to offer advice in her family that's not just health related, although she is worried that there is something wrong with Fern. It's intriguing that she doesn't think there's a thing wrong with Avery because he eats like a horse and he breaks everything he touches and he's nasty and dirty. And so, yeah, he's a boy. So she's not one bit worried about Avery. Although we might look at Avery and think, well, maybe Avery needs to rein it in just a little bit there because he's
Uh-huh.
probably, he's going to break a limb doing some of this kind of stuff or hurt somebody else. I don't know. You think maybe Avery's the one we should be concerned about. But it's Fern that she's worried about because of this strange imagination. But Dr. Dan is quite delighted by it. He thinks that he's the one that says, have you ever thought about how the spider's webs really are miraculous and that nobody taught the spider? He said, he asked Mrs. Arable about what, she can do those crocheting projects, but somebody taught her how to do that. Nobody taught the spider. The spider was born knowing how to do that. So he's this lovely voice of both science and wonder all at once. He has not become so clinical or so scientific that he has lost a sense of things being lovely and wonderful. And so there's that nice sense there. And his reassurance to Mrs. Arable is quite nice. We also get a little foreshadowing about Henry Fussy coming up in the story. Fern's interest here that we see later on. His questions that he asks are probing in some ways, but they also show this kind of respect for childhood. That's very much what we see in E.B. White himself.
Hmm. You raise a point with the way in which. And thank you for letting us know a little bit about Dr. Dorian, and I can't wait to hear about Henry. But
Yeah.
in the meantime, it strikes me that I'm a parent. My wife is a parent. We have 3 now, all legal adults.
Yeah.
Though one is still in high school with us, but the um, the the tendency, I'll put it this way, of mothers, more particularly than fathers, to see their children as an extension of themselves, particularly
Okay.
their daughters,
Okay.
and thereby have a different standard. As you were describing, it seems that Fern has been held to versus Avery. Is that a fair assessment?
It definitely, and especially in 1950s America too. You can definitely see that idea happening there. And it's nice that she is concerned. I remember one time with our first child, I rushed to the doctor, and then what he actually wrote on the diagnosis was nervous mother. And at the time, I was like, yeah, I was really agitated. But then that same doctor, years later, was taking care of one of the children and said something. And he said, "Oh, that was a compliment." Because I mentioned it to him. I said, one time you said, he said, that was a compliment that you were concerned enough that you brought me a healthy kid just because you were worried. And so I was glad you came and had your doubts, smoothed over and that you were reassured by the visit. But there's certainly this sense there that when we have a child, there sometimes when children just frustrate us, when we're like, okay, I know exactly why they're doing that. That's one thing. But then when they're a mystery to us, like, I don't get that at all. When you have a child who does something that you say, I never did that as a kid. Never. And
Right.
sometimes, we've all gotten told that we are going to, I've heard the phrase "paying for your raising," so, um, there were certain things that I did as a child that, yes, have been revisited upon me. I'm like, yes, that's, and then there's some other things I think I never did that. And my husband has got some things to answer for because clearly those are things he did. I didn't do those things. But when our children do things that we're like, I'm completely lost here. That is totally outside. That is sometimes scary. And those are those times that we need sometimes, whether it's a Dr. Dorian or somebody else to say, I don't get this. I don't understand. And as Mrs. Arable says, what she doesn't understand worries her. She's not comfortable with the things she does not understand. And this is a great story about things that we don't understand. But sometimes, yeah, with kids, those are sometimes the things that are the scariest for sure. It's also having legal adults now. Yeah.
Right.
Mm.
Um, I want to one last question, and then I want to give you space to talk about the 3 characters, the soul triptych of Charlotte, Wilbur, and Templeton. But before that, I want to know, what does the reader, what do you feel? We are at the middle of the book, roughly. How do we feel about Templeton at this point in the story?
Well, we're not supposed to like Templeton. I mean, he's a rat. And we're not necessarily supposed to like rats, and although they certainly serve their purpose in the world, just as spiders do. They deal with things that no other animal wants to handle, and they have their own function certainly, but we find them repellent as human beings generally, and so we at this point find him to be maybe funny. but annoying and definitely selfish. And so we may not really see that even Templeton has a purpose there in the barn, that he is part of this a web, just like Charlotte's web. It's this beautiful web of all these interconnected beings that live here together, including the humans. The farm is all sort of woven together in this way, and he's a part of it, even if he doesn't think that he is sometimes, and even if we think that he's not that lovely a part of it, he's still part of the whole web.
Well, so at this point in our beautiful tale, Wilbur has been spared by
Yeah.
Charlotte's first web, and you raised it in our and we kind of understand the nature of the main characters
Right.
and maybe even have an inkling of their own trajectory and development. But you had referenced in our correspondence that you perceive a soul triptych with Charlotte, Wilbur, and Templeton. I would love for you to explain what that looks like in your estimation and what we can take away from that.
Human beings are wired for threes. We're just made that way. If and not just in stories, but definitely in stories, because if we have a fairy, a genie, somebody shows up and says, "I would like to offer you 4.7 wishes." Like, I don't think you're an actual fairy or genie. I need to see some ID, because we know that when you get wishes, you get uno dos tres, 3 wishes. And as we learned in Aladdin, ixnay on the wishing for more wishes. You get 3 wishes. That's it. That's how it works. We have 3 pigs, 3 bears. That's how stories work, because they're like firm stool. They have 3 legs.
Mm.
They hold up the story. And White, although he doesn't rely on a lot of conventional symbolism, he doesn't. It's not that kind of story. It's not a fantasy kind of story. It's in many ways imaginative and lovely, but not with a lot of heavy symbolism that we might see. It's very subtle. He does it with a very light hand. But he does something really lovely with threes. He does some nice things with threes. We'll talk about one other nice group of threes at the very, very end of the story. Um, he doesn't always use threes, but he does use this with these 3 characters, Charlotte and Wilbur and Templeton, the only named animals there in the barn. And that sort of soul triptych, the idea that we as human beings are triune, because we are made in the image of our creator, who is triune. So we have physical bodies, we have minds or wills, and we have a spirit, a soul. So that we're all of those things make us who we are. And it's a convention that you see in a lot of literature. My students always laugh. They always say that once we talk about this, then it becomes like those magic pictures that are like 3D. And once you see it, you can't not see it. It's like, oh,
Right.
it's there. So once we've explained that, then, I explained about Star Wars, you have Luke and Leia and Han Solo have that some kind of relationship. So many of these literary characters do that, where we have 3 characters who sort of branch out into those roles that are part of our triune being. We have a character who represents sort of the physical or the body. And so in Star Wars, that's Han Solo, who just doesn't want to die, doesn't want to, he's a physical kind of guy. And then we'll have a character who is the mind or the will. Interestingly enough, this character is almost always female. If there's a female person in that triangle, it's usually, she usually takes that role. Um, so the mind or the will. So that's like Princess Leia, or, lots of other characters. Hermione Granger, she's that one. And then you have a character who is kind of the soul or the center or the middle there. And that's Wilbur, as we'll see. He is the character that we see as being the soul or the kind of the heart of the story. He's the heart of it. But it's Charlotte who is the mind and the will. She is the one she is most intelligent, clearly, and she is the one who also creates reality. She shapes reality with her web. So she takes on that role. And then, of course, we have Templeton, who is, all he cares about is what he's going to eat. It's all food, food, food for him. And it's funny because we have some amazing descriptions. Like the slop descriptions in this book just mesmerize me. The list of things, and there are always kinds of lists, like what the stuff is that's in the junkyard. He has these wonderful sort of Walt Whitman encyclopedia lists that just go on and on. But that's all Templeton wants to hear about is food. List of food would be great for him. He is this very sensual sort of creature. And yet it takes all three of them to
Mm.
bring this story together. And working in concert, not always sometimes there's conflict between them, but that works so beautifully. And it is a reminder that we all are sort of part of something, that we don't operate independently. And even Templeton, who thinks he is a free agent and he does whatever he wants, he's still part of this. They're all sort of part of something together, just as we are all part of nature and part of life and part of time.
Oh, man. That's good. I thank you for that reminder. That's really helpful for myself and hopefully for those who are listening. Any final thoughts before we end this part of our conversation?
Really, that this is again, it's just such a wonderful story to revisit, and it in many ways, like Walden, like some of the other books that influenced it. Once you've read Charlotte's Web, you don't have to read it again in order. You can just pick up a chapter and read it.
Mm.
And some of these chapters, the miracle chapter in particular, and then another one that we'll talk about later, they just have these beautiful passages that you can just sort of pick up and read and enjoy. And in that sense, it has that kind of timeless quality to it. That is one of the reasons that I believe that it's still, even if it doesn't still have some of our 1950s values, and we have to explain to people about how these vehicles work and some other things in this book, that it still has a power in our lives, no matter what era we find ourselves living through.
Oh, thank you so much. I'm looking forward to next week when we will be talking about how Wilbur is terrific and
Yes,
radiant, and of course, the crickets. So
yes,
thank you so
yes.
much. Today's episode of The Plunge is sponsored by Jabberwocky by Lewis Carroll. 'Twas brillig, and the slithy toves did gyre and gimble in the wabe. All mimsy were the borogoves, and the mome raths outgrabe. Beware the Jabberwock, my son, the jaws that bite, the claws that catch. Beware the Jubjub bird, and shun the frumious Bandersnatch. He took his vorpal sword in hand. Long time the manxome foe he sought. So rested he by the tumtum tree and stood awhile in thought. And, as in uffish thought he stood, the Jabberwock with eyes of flame came whiffling through the tulgey wood and burbled as it came. 1, 2, and through, the vorpal blade went snicker snack. He left it dead, and with its head he went galumphing back. And hast thou slain the Jabberwock? Come to my arms, my beamish boy. O frabjous day, callooh callay, he chortled in his joy. 'Twas brillig, and the slithy toves did gyre and gimble in the wabe. All mimsy were the borogoves, and the mome raths outgrabe. Thank you, Jabberwocky by Lewis Carroll, for that phenomenal sponsorship for this week's episode of The Plunge. Can't thank you enough, Lewis. And really, in reflecting upon that poem as it came forth through my purloined voice, I realize, yeah, I see where Dr. Seuss got it. Congrats. Thanks, Jabberwocky, for sponsoring today's episode of The Plunge.